So today I'm going to be demonstrating a custom Magic the Gathering deck of cards that I created. It's 43 cards. This can be expanded to 60 with any cards that you'd like, but these are the bare minimum of the cards that are needed to make it happen. This deck is not Turing complete, but it has plans to be. It was inspired by the project that made a 60 card tournament legal and legacy Magic the Gathering deck that was Turing complete and could run a universal Turing machine with 2 states and 18 symbols. And this proves that Magic the Gathering can technically calculate everything. However, to do so requires a lot of work. There's a lot of steps in between converting a normal Turing machine that can do something, for example, adding 2 plus 2. It takes a lot of steps to go from there down to the universal Turing machine that was built into Magic the Gathering. In fact, it's so many steps that in fact it actually takes 400 million, more than 400 million creature tokens in order to create the tape that would be needed. It would take a very, very long time to play that game, and I doubt that many creature tokens could fit on your game table. So instead of that, I decided to see if I could make a deck that computes in more discrete logic terms. So this deck aims to just add 2 numbers, and you'll see how in a moment, but I have plans to eventually try and make this deck Turing complete. I'm going to start with adding just some basic functionality in more than just addition, like possibly being able to execute more than one instruction almost per deck. And then also maybe even writing some kind of architecture and encoding some storage and RAM and other things into Magic the Gathering. That's the end goal here, is to be able to create a computer that can actually be run in Magic the Gathering and can finish computations in our lifetime. So I thought that this would be a great place to start and kind of show what I've been able to do in the small period of time I've been working on this. So again, this deck adds 2 numbers, and so in order to do that, I'll start a local game in Cockatrice here. I will load my add 2 numbers deck, and I will load another deck that I have just lying around. So the first thing I'll do is I'll draw 7 cards for both players. And let's say that I go first. It doesn't really matter as long as there's no kind of detrimental effects, because I'll be drawing my whole deck in a moment, and I'll be able to deal with anything on their side of the board. So there's no big deal, uh, but I'll just go first here. And another thing is these aren't the right cards. I have a specific hand of 7 that I'll need in order to get this to work. So instead, I'm just going to toss all these cards back into my library, and I'll draw the 7 cards that I need. So to do this combo, we'll need 1 Ancient Tomb, 2 Lotus Petals, a Grim Monolith, a Power Artifact, a Gemstone Array. I get another Lotus Petal, I must have forgotten that, and a Staff of Domination. And these are the 7 cards that I'll need in order to enact my combo, and I'll just shuffle the library. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get infinite colorless mana. Seems that I grabbed a Rito-Lantern by mistake. Okay, so we'll get infinite colorless mana. First thing I'm going to do is cast Ancient Tomb, and tap that, deal 2 damage to myself, to play Grim Monolith. Grim Monolith is a 2-cost artifact that doesn't untap during my untap step. It can tap for 3 mana and costs 4 to untap it. I'll next play 2 Lotus Petals, which can tap to sacrifice to add 1 mana of any color to my mana pool. So I'll play 2 of them. I'll tap, sacrifice them, and play Power Artifact. Now, Power Artifact enchants my Grim Monolith, so I will attach to Grim Monolith. This causes the ability to cost 2 less, meaning that I can tap for 3 and untap for 2, netting me 1 each time. So using this, I can simply tap and untap and tap and untap and tap and untap and tap and untap, each time gaining 1 mana. And so with that, I'll end up casting my Gemstone Array. So with the Gemstone Array, now I can filter this mana. Using I can pay 2 to put a charge counter on there, which is no big deal from my infinite mana. I can pay 2 and still have the same amount of mana. And so the next thing is I can remove a charge counter to add 1 mana of any color to my mana pool. So I can do that infinitely as well. So now I have infinite mana of any color. And that'll be useful so I can play cards in my deck. And the last thing I'll do is cast Staff of Domination. And Staff of Domination, it allows me to pay 5, no big deal again, and tap it to draw a card. So I can tap it, draw a card. Then I'll pay 1, which again, not a big deal, and I can untap it. And I can continue this cycle of tapping and untapping to draw my entire library. So to do that, I'll just do draw cards, and I'll type 35, and now I have my entire library. Now, just to make things easier to see, I'm going to discard all the cards that I no longer need. So all the extras of the combo cards I have in here, I'll just discard those. Those are just in there so that I can get them more easily. And so if you actually wanted to try to bring this deck out and play it legally, you would have to, it wouldn't be as hard to do. It wouldn't be a ridiculously small chance. It's still a very small chance, but at least it's not ridiculously small anymore. So, it appears that I left Darksteel Plate in by mistake, so I can just discard that as well. And it looks like I should have taken everything out. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to play... oh, I forgot to take out the staffs. The next thing I'm going to do is play Genie Illuminatus. And Genie Illuminatus gives all of my instants and sorceries replicate. And the replicate cost is equal to their normal cost. So essentially, this means that each time I play an instant and sorcery, I can play it an infinite number of times, which is great. So another thing that I've got is a Rieto Lantern. And this allows me to pay 3, so I can do that however I want because I have infinite mana, and put a card from a graveyard onto the bottom of my library, which currently doesn't have any cards in it, but I can draw one with Staff of Domination. So anytime I cast a card, it will instantly go back into my library, or into my graveyard, which I can return to my library and instantly draw. So I can cast any card an infinite number of times, and when I cast it, I can copy it an infinite number of times thanks to this genie here. So the next thing that I'll do is I will play Recycle. So Recycle will skip my draw step. Now, I don't actually want this to happen to me. Since I'm going to be the one that is drawing the cards to execute the instructions, I don't want this to happen. But when I exile my opponent's entire deck and hand, I'm going to want them to not die, and therefore so that the program can continue to execute. So instead, I'm going to play Donate. This will allow me to give my Recycle to my opponent. And Donate goes to the graveyard, again goes to my library, and then goes to my hand. So I can play this as many times as I'd like. The next thing that I'll do is I will play Wild Evocation. Wild Evocation is an interesting card. It says at the beginning of my upkeep, or each player's upkeep, that player reveals a card at random from his or her hand. If it's a land card, you put it onto the battlefield. We don't care about that. Otherwise, the player casts it without playing his mana cost if able. So essentially this says anytime that I've got cards in my hand, I will randomly pick one at the beginning of my upkeep and cast it for free. Now, this is very important because, one, I won't have access to my infinite mana anymore as soon as I pass the turn. I'll be exiling all of that. And secondly, I want to have control. The deck wants to have control over what cards are being cast at what time. And so, Wild Evocation allows me to do that. So, Wild Evocation will force me to cast the card that's in my hand during my upkeep. And so this is very important because I'll always have one card in my hand. just due to the way that this deck is. So that'll force me to cast it. And then when I go to my draw step immediately after my upkeep, I'll end up drawing a new card to replace it. And so that's extremely important because it'll force the player to cast the spells that are needed to kind of put the Turing machine in motion. So the next thing that I'll do is I will actually play a Blazing Archon. And so Blazing Archon has flying and says creatures can't attack you. I'm going to put that over here. And so Blazing Archon is an interesting one because it basically says that you cannot attack me, player 1. And so that's important because I'll be giving player 1 some creatures. And so I don't want them to attack me with them. I want to give them no options on their turn. And so now one thing that I can do is I can play Stolen Identity on my Blazing Archon. This will create a token. So if I copy, now I've got another Blazing Archon. And again, graveyard, library, hand. Now I've got 2 of them, but I don't need 2. I can donate 1 of them to my opponent. I think you see where this is going. Now I cannot attack him, and he cannot attack me. This puts us at a stalemate, and now neither of us can do anything. Neither of us can attack each other. And so this allows me to have creatures on my board that will be kind of storing information and being used, but not being able to be attacked or used like that, which is very good for me. The next thing is I will play Olivia Voldaren. Now, Olivia Voldaren isn't going to be something that sticks around, but I can pay 1 and a red, which is no problem, to deal 1 damage to another target creature, and that creature becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. And so that's something that I really, really want, because I have this Elvish Promenade that puts a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token onto the battlefield for each token you control. Now, that is a interesting thing that I just said, because why am I wanting to turn creatures into vampires so that I can use them for an elf spell? That doesn't make much sense. But I have a card called Artificial Evolution. Now, this card allows me to change the text of target spell or permanent. I wonder which card that's going to be, by replacing all instances of one creature type with another. So I'm going to replace all instances of the vampire type with elf. So now this allows me to change any creature that I want into an elf in addition to its other types. And it's very important that we do in addition, because we're going to be using elves as kind of the way as our clones. But we don't want to count whenever an elf... I guess we do. Never mind. So I'm confusing myself. So anyway, now we can turn creatures into elves in addition to their other types, which is great. Because we're going to be casting some more cards soon. This essentially allows us to be able to clone our inputs so that we don't lose them, and that'll make more sense later. But essentially, now I'm going to play Claws of Gix. So this allows me to sacrifice a permanent and gain 1 life. So I can sacrifice any permanent I like, gain a life, and then return it to my hand. So I can do that with, say, Wild Evocation. I can sack it, go through the loop, gain infinite life. Perfect. That's another thing that's great. Now, there's only a couple more things to do. So I'll play Laboratory Maniac. Laboratory Maniac is my halt condition. It says whenever you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. And so this will allow me to halt once all of the cards in my deck are done. This will allow me to kind of set myself in a spot where we can view the board and see what happens. And then I've only got a few more things to do. So the last thing I'm going to do is cast Rotlung Reanimator. And so Rotlung Reanimator is a 2/2 black zombie cleric, and it says whenever Rotlung Reanimator or another cleric is put into a graveyard from play, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token into play. And so the interesting thing about Rotlung Reanimator is that whenever another cleric dies, we put a creature token into play. And so I can actually change that with Artificial Evolution. So I'm going to change this with Artificial Evolution to be, instead, I'm going to change this to Angels. So if we remember that, we'll say Rotlung 1 equals Angels. I'll just put that there in case we forget. I don't think there's any way to kind of put a note on here, but whatever. Anyway, I will then give it to my opponent using Donate. So now they have one that whenever an angel comes into play, is killed. They will put a 2/2 black zombie creature token into play. Actually, nope, I don't want to do that. I want to make it elf. So this will say elf. Whenever an elf is put into a graveyard from play, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token into play. So the final thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put Nature's Ruin. I'm going to destroy all green creatures. No green creatures, so nothing happens. It goes in here, and then I'll put it into my library. That's very important. That's actually where I'm going to put that's the first card I'm going to draw. So it's my second card I'm going to cast because I'm going to cast the card that's in my hand. Then I will play Karn Liberated. Karn Liberated allows me to -3 him to exile target permanent, and then so I can play Karn Liberated, exile target permanent, and I will exile my Claws of Gix. Great. And then I can capsize him and buy it back to bring him back to my hand. And so I can infinitely do this to exile any number of target permanents and also be able to exile cards from target player's hand. So I'm going to have this exiled, this exiled, this exiled, this exiled, this exiled, this exiled. And if I was smart, I would have included a spell that would allow my opponent to draw a card, but it seems I forgot to include that here. So instead, I'll just pretend like I have a spell like that. So we'll have a spell that says target player draws a card. And so I can cast that an infinite number of times to have them draw infinite cards, exile those cards from their hand using Karn, and eventually exile their entire deck. So I will do move top cards to exile, move top 50 cards to exile. Everything is in exile. There's nothing they can do. They will skip their draw step with recycle, so they will not die from decking, and they will just have a Rotlung Reanimator. I will then exile Genie Illuminatus. I will move all the cards to my library, draw them, and then exile them with Karn. So we'll move my entire graveyard to exile. I will play Wild Evocation again. I will... I still, regardless of whether these are still on the battlefield or not, I still have infinite mana because I put it all into my mana pool. So I will exile these cards and Rito Lantern. So these are the cards that we've got at this point. Exile Ancient Tomb. Exile... and then there's one last thing that I need to do. So this last thing is Entreat the Angels. So Entreat the Angels allows me to create some 4/4 white angels. And these are actually going to be the things that we use to add. So let's say we want to add 2/3. So to add 2/3, we'll first cast Entreat the Angels, and we'll create 2 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying. So we'll create 2 of them. Perfect. So now let's say I want to do that again to get my 3. Well, this time I'll cast it and do Artificial Evolution. So this time, Entreat the Angels, we will create 3 angel tokens, but instead of being angels, they'll actually be a different type, and we'll say warrior for this. Unfortunately, I can't really change the name, and this is just the easiest way to do it. So we'll just say these are warriors, angels, warriors. So it doesn't technically matter since they're all elves. They're all going to be elves thanks to Olivia Voldaren. But just for clarity, we'll make and possible upgrades and interactions in the future. These are warriors, these are angels. Otherwise, we could just, cast this for 2 and 3. And then I'll exile Entreat the Angels. I'll exile Artificial Evolution. I'll exile Glamour Die, Stolen Identity, Donate. I will use Olivia Voldaren to deal 1 damage to this angel, 1 damage to this angel, and all these angels until they all become elves. I will then exile Olivia Voldaren using the Karn combo. Now I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to play Karn. I'm going to exile send a trigger on the stack saying target player exiles a card from their hand. So I put that on the stack. At that same time, I'm now going to capsize Karn. And so Karn goes back to my hand. And so now I can bring the card, and now the trigger on the stack resolves, and Karn exiles a card from my hand. And I'm going to exile Capsize. And now I'll play Karn again, exile target permanent. Karn will go into exile. And now you'll see I've got 1 card in my hand, 1 card in my library. My opponent has no actions, and I will pass the turn. Everything is set up. Everything is a forced action at this point. So, we've got 2 4/4 Angel Elves, and we've got 3 4/4 Warrior Elves. A Rotlung Reanimator that says whenever an elf is put into a graveyard, we create a 2/2 black zombie. 2 cards that say we can't attack each other. A card that says when I draw a card while my library has no cards in it, I win the game. A card that forces me to cast whatever is in my hand at the beginning of my upkeep. And a card that makes my opponent not die. So, my opponent's turn, they untap, upkeep, they attempt to draw, or they skip their draw step, so that doesn't happen. They go to their main, there's no actions that they can take, so they end the turn. Pass to me. I will untap during my upkeep while the evocation triggers, and I will cast Elvish Promenade without paying its mana cost. Elvish Promenade puts a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token onto the battlefield for each elf I control. So, this allows me to create, since I have 5 elves, I will create 5 1/1 elf warrior creature tokens. I'll move them down here for clarity. And then Elvish Promenade goes to my graveyard. And now on my draw step, I will draw the card in my hand. I have no mana since I passed turn and all the mana emptied from my mana pool. I can't attack. I have no activated abilities I can play. So I move to my main and my end step. The other player untaps, upkeeps, skips their draw step, goes in their main, nothing they can do, second main, and pass. Finally, it's my turn again. And I will untap, nothing. Upkeep, Wild Evocation triggers. I will play Nature's Ruin, and this will destroy all green creatures. So this will destroy all 5 of these elves. And so I'll just drag them over here. Now, Rotlung Reanimator says whenever an elf is put into a graveyard from play, or in this case dies, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token into play. So I just had 5 elves die, so I will create 5 2/2 black zombies. Now I have 5 2/2 black zombies, and using that, we now have our answer. 2 + 3 is 5. Now, we haven't quite gotten there yet, but because I still need to go to my draw step draw a card. I have no cards in my library. I win the game. And now we freeze frame. And we can see we still have our 2 angels that we input. We still have our 3 warriors that we input. And now we have 5 2/2 black zombies as well. And now something interesting about this, though, is that I can make these tokens 2/2s of anything. Because as long as I can find a spell that allows me to create a 2/2 token, I can make an infinite number of 2/2 tokens. And so I could make these 2/2 tokens. I just chose 4/4 because it was the easiest one. And I can make these, and I can make this Rotlung Reanimator spawn whatever type and color I want. So I can, since I have another card in here, if I view my exile, I have another card called Glamour Dye. And this changes the text of target spell or permanent by replacing all instances of one color word with another. So I can change Rotlung Reanimator, say spawn some 2/2 white angels. And so now what I can do is I can have the Rotlung Reanimator spawn angels, which will now all be on this side, and essentially with some other shenanigans, I still need to gain control of these angels. These angels would still be here, so it's a little bit confusing, but essentially I can add and then write over the previous value. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to being able to improve upon this in the future. Hopefully this all made sense. If not, just feel free to comment or just ask me. And yeah, so that's where I'm at right now in the Magic the Gathering architecture, and we'll see how far we're able to get.